Hello and welcome to the tutorial all about ecosystems. So this little tutorial is designed to introduce you to the concept of an ecosystem, so looking at what an ecosystem is. Then it's going to go on to look at how animals are actually ordered within an ecosystem, and this is done using something called a trophic level. So we'll go into what that is and how that actually works. So on this page here, we've got a whole range of different ecosystems. So we've got our desert ecosystem, our Arctic ecosystem, our coral reef ecosystem, our alpine region ecosystem, and here's a zoom in on a forest ecosystem up there. So all of these ecosystems have two things in common. Firstly, they're made up of living things such as plants, corals, fish, and they're also made up of non-living things like water, rocks, air, and under here is some soil as well. So it's really important to note that an ecosystem is a community of organisms, so living things, interacting with their physical environment. Okay, so those community of organisms, those animals interact with each other, but they also interact with the non-living environment around them. So we'll get started on that. The fancy science word I should point out too for living things is biotic. So if I refer to something being biotic, I'm referring to being a living organism. If I'm referring to something as abiotic, it means it's not living. And that's things like sunlight, water, soil, etc. So in each of these ecosystems, the animals are arranged in something that we like to call trophic levels. So on this page here, what I've done is I've put all the different levels of the trophic levels, starting with the highest up here, which is 5, down here to producers. I've also put bacteria and decomposers in here as well, but technically they don't have a number on the trophic level or on the food pyramid that we're going to look at in a second. So what I just want to run through first is down here in this little box, I've got our abiotic factors, so our non-living things which contribute and all contribute to the ecosystem as well, such as air, soil, sunlight, and water. And all the animals within this ecosystem and plants, all the living things, need these abiotic factors or components to help them survive. So here we've got a whole heap of different Australian animals, as well as our grass down here and our fungi. And they've got something unique about them, whereas they all fit in nicely into this trophic level. So they don't all share a level. I've chosen animals that all have their own level that they fit nicely into. So the most obvious one down here is our fungi. So our fungi are a decomposer. So what their role is to basically break down the stuff in the environment. So dead things, break it down, put the nutrients back into the ecosystem, which the producers can then use to help themselves produce their own energy, which we'll get to in a minute. So our fungi down here belongs in the decomposers section. And this is the one that I was saying isn't technically a level, but I wanted to put it in there anyway because decomposers are very important within ecosystems. So think back to the Lion King when they talk about the circle of life and how the antelope die, they get absorbed into the grass, and then the antelope eat the grass. So that's what our decomposers' role is. Producers, they are called producers because they produce their own energy. So they don't get energy by eating other things. They get energy by using sun. And they have special things in their cells called chloroplasts, plants do, and that allows them to create their own energy using the process of photosynthesis. So producers produce their own energy. So they're at level 1 on this trophic level. Next up, we have our primary consumers. Now, primary consumers are herbivores, which means they only eat producers. Okay, so they only eat plants. That's what a herbivore is, and that's a role of a primary consumer. So they get their energy by eating the producers, which produce their own energy. Okay, next up we have our secondary consumers. Now obviously this little bandicoot here is not going to eat an eastern grey kangaroo, but what they do eat is they do eat a lot of insects and moths and that kind of stuff. And insects and moths fit in our primary consumers because insects and moths eat our plants, okay? So they eat producers. And that's why the little eastern barred bandicoot is up here, because he feeds on insects which belong in our primary consumer section. So he is a carnivore because he eats insects which are classified as meat. So he's a carnivore, and all animals in our secondary consumers are carnivores because they eat primary consumers. So they might eat a little bit of plants as well, which is fine. So they're probably more of an omnivore if they eat fruit as well as little insects. But primarily, all animals in secondary consumers will feed on things in primary consumer section. Next up, we have our tertiary consumers. Tertiary consumer that I've chosen to look at today is a fox. This one tied in really well because inside the fox's mouth is actually an eastern barred bandicoot. So foxes do eat eastern barred bandicoots, and they're a tertiary consumer because they eat animals from our secondary consumer level. Now, obviously, tertiary consumers are also carnivores, and they're carnivores that eat other carnivores, whereas our secondary consumers are carnivores that eat herbivores. So our top consumer, or our apex consumer, is an animal which does not have any other predators. So they're the top animal within that ecosystem. And the one I've chosen to look at is dingoes. So while dingoes don't primarily kill foxes to eat them, they do actually hunt and kill foxes because they see them as a threat to their territory. So they will kill a fox, not really likely to happen the other way around. Dingoes will eat eastern grey kangaroos as well, and they'll eat small marsupials from the secondary consumer section too. So that's just a rundown of the different levels, starting with level 5 up here, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And I've also put in our bacteria and our decomposers. The cool way to remember this is that it's just like education. So when you're little, you go to primary school, then you go to secondary school, and when you go to uni or TAFE, that's taking tertiary education. So it's a good way to remember primary, secondary, tertiary. It's just like how you go through school. So what I've done here is something called a food pyramid. So if we just flick back to this, what I've done here is I've just listed them out and I've put the pictures next to it. A food pyramid is just a drawing of a pyramid, and the animals that belong in each category is put at a different level. So our apex consumer, or our top consumer, is obviously up the top. Now this is a food pyramid that I did of all the animals that live in my backyard, and it was a little bit tricky to know which animals to put on top and all that kind of stuff. But I'll get you to do this activity as well, just to start getting you thinking about how the animals in your backyard are interacting as well. So down here we've got our decomposers, which is our mushroom, and interestingly a fly. Producers, which remember make their own energy using photosynthesis in the sun. Primary consumers here, which are herbivores, and they feed only on producers, so only on plants. Secondary consumers, which eat our primary consumers, so they're carnivores because they eat our herbivores down in our primary consumers. Tertiary consumers, this little possum up here, is going to eat the mice and insects in our secondary consumers section. So that's a carnivore which eats other carnivores. And again, right up the top, a cat, feral cat, is the top consumer in my backyard because it will actually hunt and kill possums as well. All right, so that's been a really brief introduction into what an ecosystem is and the different trophic levels in an ecosystem. What I am going to leave you with is some questions which you'll be required to answer and to bring those answers to class. Okay, so the first question I want you to do, and we have looked at this in class, so this one should be pretty easy, is just write down a definition of an ecosystem for me. Question 2. What are the 5 trophic levels in an ecosystem? So I don't want you to write level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want you to tell me the names of the levels, so producers, etc. Question 3. What does abiotic mean? And what are the abiotic components that help form part of an ecosystem? So what does abiotic mean? And what are the abiotic components that help form an ecosystem. Question 3. What is the role of decomposers in an ecosystem and why are they really important? Okay, so what do decomposers do and why are they really important to an ecosystem? Last question. Do you think there is any one particular ecosystem that is the most important? And if so, which one do you think is the most important and why? And if you don't agree, why don't you agree? So, for example, do you think a forest ecosystem is way more important than, say, looking at our Arctic ecosystems or our desert ecosystems? And if you do think one particular ecosystem is more important, I want you to tell me why. So there's the 5 questions you have to answer, and I hope that it's clearly explained in the video and that you can pull that information out. All right, guys, see you soon. Bye.